When we think of the book of Job, and as we have gone through a large portion of 42 chapters, and we've done in detail some of the more important chapters, those that were in the front, and then most of it from the back. And we have left off a great deal of the discourse between the three friends and Job. We will still have a very good idea of the book of Job. Some people think that the book of Job is a poetry, work of fiction, but I think not, especially when there is so much detail given to us, and as well as the fact that God actually spoke to Job, where all the three friends and even Elihu and people around them could actually hear. And it would be quite a story if somebody actually wrote this as pure fiction and also put words into God's mouth, and that would be blasphemous. And I think because the fact that God was recorded as speaking, I would say that the entire book of Job is a very crucial sacred text that narrates God's words as he did speak in chapters 1 and 2, and then towards the end in chapters 38, 38, 39, 40, and 41, where four chapters at the end to sort Job out. Now, what is so important about the book of Job is that the book of Job gave us a glimpse of a few things. The book of Job gives us what God sees in Job. And we have constantly kept in view that Job was blameless, upright, fears God, and turns away from evil. This is the character that God expects of people. Now, understand that book of Job is not to do with Israel, it's to do with general mankind. So if you take Israel out of the equation, because this book does not refer to Israel and does not refer to the law, we find that it is a very unique book that talks about humanity. And it is at a time where ancient Near East, that people actually knew God, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and probably set in that era. And even till today, if that is the case with general mankind, be blameless, upright, fear God, and turn away from evil would have been the character that God expects today as well. And so this whole entire book revolves around this character, which Job adequately defends himself as righteous. But he still uh, encountered calamity, and the calamity was that he lost his wealth and then he lost his children. And it was in a conversation which he had no privy to, which was done uh, in the place where God was. And so we see in verse 6 that it was a time when the sons of God came to present themselves before God, and Hasatan also came among them. And so these were all taken place in heaven. So we'll use heaven as that part of the name, right? With reference to that, nothing to do with on earth where Job was. This was a conversation that was between God and the angels, and we saw Hasatan was one of the angels, and he was given the task to test Job. And in two chapters, calamity appears to have come upon Job, losing his wealth, his family, and then his health. And then we came to the rest of the book. Now, what can we take away from such an expression of the narrative is this, that righteous people like Job actually encounters calamity and evil. And remember, evil is in the sight of the beholder. So it's evil in the eyes of Job because this is not what he wanted, not what he expected, but he actually encountered it. And it was a very bad case of boils. And so in chapter 3, he wished he wasn't born. I mean, we can just imagine and understand the emotions that has gone on in Job's heart. That he had spent his entire life, however long that is, to be very careful with how he operated his life and conducted his life, and also prayed for his children to make sure that nobody actually offends God. And so when the wife says, curse God and die, she literally said, when you curse God in his face, God will strike you dead, and then let's end all this. But he didn't. And so we were told Job never sinned with his lips. And he actually could say, whatever God gave, he can take away. That's fine. But what wasn't fine is, why was he suffering? Losing animals is not a problem, but losing his family, losing his health, he just couldn't understand. Why would a righteous man suffer? And as we have seen in chapter 42, nobody came to his help. Not his wife, not his family of brothers and sisters and close friends. And the ones who came from far away. Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad. And all that conversation that took place was that he was trying to find out, why would a righteous person suffer like him, who is blameless, who is upright, who fears God, who shuns evil, and he has this predicament of somebody who is actually evil. And then he sees the evil person, the wicked man, walking around with no problems at all. And that was what he was struggling with. He was trying to rationalize and find an answer. And he thought that God would probably have left all of these events to the stars. And that's why it had fallen on him that by the chance of the stars, he had come into such predicament. And that was wrong. But you notice one thing throughout the entire book of Job was that Job never sought any form of restoration of health. He never went to see a doctor. He never went to ask God for restoration of health. He merely sought answers for his questions, which nobody could answer him. His three friends that came to see him, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, instead of consoling him, pointed out to an age-old principle that the Near East and the Far East, everybody held on to this principle of life, that the good will be repaid with good, and that evil will be repaid with evil. And because Job had encountered his suffering as evil, there must be something that Job did that God is repaying him for his evil. And Job kept saying, show me what evil I've done, because he didn't do any evil whatsoever. And that is when we came towards the end of the book of Job, that Elihu, a young man who couldn't stand the three friends, and also found Job to have said things which is not true of God. And Elihu put everyone in their place. A young man who spoke up about the reality of God's character. And just because God didn't say anything and do anything doesn't mean he is not seeing what's happening. And so give God the benefit of the doubt, trying to help Job understand that it is not incumbent on Job to ask God for an answer, because God is God and Job is but a man. How can man understand what God is doing? How can man question God? Otherwise, there will be no separation of who God is and who man is. And that is, those are very wise words. And so, in the course of suffering, Job may have said things which he now learns to regret. But the three friends were completely wrong about Job. Finally, God spent 4 chapters to recalibrate Job's understanding of God. It is not in the stars, God said. What God has done, man will never understand. Why God does so many things, man will also not understand. So, what is man supposed to do? Man is supposed to use his knowledge and wisdom that God has made him in his image to come to terms of who he is. Whatever he can sort out in his own intelligence and wisdom, that's all he can do. Apart from that, wait on God. It doesn't matter whether he understood or not, but there is nothing that he can understand. If he can't understand so much in life, what is this to understand? And that's what God is trying to tell Job. God has done so much, very little does man understand. So don't question God. And all through, we find this very strange phenomena. God never once spoke about restoring Job. Job never once spoke about restoration of health. It has always been about God, to sort out the differences between God and man. And so, in such a trial, in such pain, man like Job would have said things which now he regrets. And when we came to Job chapter 42, was when everything ended. Job learned the truth. Everything God wants to do, he can bring it to pass. And there is nothing that God is doing that man would understand. That would be the conclusion. Teach me. That's Job's finest moments. God, teach me. Whatever he has known about God by ear, now he has seen it with his eyes. And this would probably be the first and last encounter with God through the whirlwind. And everybody hears this because at the end of the day, Job says, I retract everything I've said about you. I am wrong. But then God comes to talk about Eliphaz and the friends. They have spoken wrongly. And we have seen that God was angry, right? My wrath is kindled against you and your 2 friends because you have misrepresented me. Misrepresented me. When man misrepresents God, God will be mighty angry. And so whenever we say things about God, I think we should be warned not to incur the wrath of God by simply speaking about God or saying things which we're not clear or we don't know. And so now it is very clear to Job, he has learned much more about God, to be patient with him, not to question things, but to learn through his own wisdom and knowledge, to do whatever he can to console himself, to sit on dust and ashes. And then he realized, you know what? At the end of the day, I am dust and ashes. And so, how can dust and ashes speak to the Creator God? God gave the 3 friends a way of resolving their mistakes. And Job prayed. And so when we see in Job chapter 42, verse 10, which we have seen, God returned all the captivity to Job. Remember, this is captivity. And this is return. And that is why there is this view that everything was already taken away, but it was an illusion. And now it's given back. And God gave more. And that's the picture that's given here. In verse 11, I think we can learn from this when we see our friends suffering physically, we should be mindful not to be like the brothers and sisters and all the friends of Job who stayed away. I think the lesson that we learn that's positive in verse 11 is that we should go and comfort and console and be with these people. I think this is a very, very good lesson to be learned. And as Job had more blessings, up to double, as you can see, and that he has his 7 sons and 3 daughters back, you find that this word had does not talk about birth. And as some people had said, it does not talk about resurrection. There is no such concept here in this verse. But of course, there are many people who would use those concepts to explain. But all we can say is this is how we can see in the Hebrew. That's what I'm trying to say. Apart from that, I think many people have different opinions of things as well. So just look at the text and the grammar, and that's all I am showing here. Now, the end of days is something which we can see what God's blessing is. Now, blessing came in the form of the livestock, right? Came in the form of children, and came in the form of grandchildren and great grandchildren. Because in the eastern part, family is very prominent and very precious. And when a person like Job gets to see his children, his grandchildren, his great grandchildren, and if possible, the great great grandchildren in this 140 years, this would be true Eastern blessing. So he is a man who is satisfied. And that's how it ended. God didn't miraculously heal him. Doesn't say here at all. So what we can actually tell is his dignity was restored. His wealth was restored. His family was restored. And his life was blessed. I think we can surmise that his health was restored, but it doesn't specifically describe it in chapter 42. And so we find that this particular story here in the book of Job was never about suffering, was never about illness, was very much about God. And if we miss the book of Job to see God as a whole and learn to be like Job, blameless, upright, fears God, and shuns evil, and then knows that he cannot question God, then I think we would have missed the whole story. The entire book of Job is about character. Job's character and how he moved on from where he was to where he is now, and also about God, very much about God himself, without any description of Israel and the law, how God's character was shown throughout this book of Job, and how blessings will be, and how Job really had a long life. And with this, I trust that we will be able to spend more time to study the book of Job and glean more from the Hebrew context, such that we will be able to learn to be like Job and learn to appreciate God a whole lot more through this period of study. And with this, we come to the end of our session and our study of Job today.